Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here to spend part of your Thursday night with us. Such a big crowd, too. My name's Bryn Durgan. I'm the Director of Programming here at Bookstore One. And for most of you, I know it's a welcome back, but I see a lot of new faces up here, too. So I also just want to say that whether you've been to our book clubs or author signings before, we wouldn't be able to offer even a fraction of the programming that we do offer if it weren't for everyone like you. So it means the world to us. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let me introduce you to our moderator for this evening, Carrie Seidman. Carrie is an opinion columnist and the dance critic for the Sarasota Herald Tribune. She is also the creator, writer, and host of the Facing Mental Illness newsletter and podcast. A graduate of the Columbia University School of Journalism, Carrie previously worked for the New York Times, Los Angeles Herald Examiner, Albuquerque Journal, and Albuquerque Tribune. Carrie will be in conversation with the author we're all here to celebrate. She is a dance writer, a journalist, and a critic based in New York City. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, The Nation, The Guardian, the Boston Globe, Dance Magazine, and the list goes on. She has spent the better part of the last 2 decades interviewing the most celebrated ballet choreographer of our time, Alexei Ratmansky. She's been following his career and viewing his work, and she's written the first biography of this groundbreaking artist. The New Yorker has called The Boy from Kyiv one of the best books of the year so far, and it's available right downstairs. But before she answers your questions and signs the books, we are going to give her a massive round of applause to the brilliant writer, Marina Harss.
Thank you, Bryn, and thank you, Marina, for asking me to share this evening with you. I am as starstruck as everybody else here.
Thank you for doing this, and Bryn, thank you so much for hosting this.
And we have not a long time frame. We will take a few questions at the end, so you can be thinking about that. But I'm going to plunge right in so that we can make the most use of our time. And I thought we'd start. Marina, if you would just take us back to the first time you saw Ratmansky Ballet, and what happened and how that led to the idea of doing a book.
Yeah, I remember it very well, very vividly actually, because it was a really seeing a kind of work that I had never seen before, really. So that whenever you see a piece of art that opens a new vista, a new window into a different style of art, it's always, you remember that very clearly. So at the time, Ratmansky was the artistic director of the Bolshoi Ballet, and he was very young, he was 36, I think, at the time. It was 2005, and the Bolshoi came to New York on tour, and they were at the Metropolitan Opera House, and they brought a lot of very familiar works, Don Quixote, Spartacus, and then they brought one of his works, which was called The Bright Stream. And nobody had heard, it was an odd name, and nobody had heard of him, and nobody knew anything about this ballet, and it was sort of the whisper campaign of that year, oh, we should go see what this ballet is, what is it all about, it has a Soviet theme. It was set on a communal farm on the Soviet steppes, and by the time intermission came around, everyone was talking about it, and everybody was knew that there was a very important new voice on the scene. And I say in the book, actually, this is something Ratmansky told me later, that Mark Morris, who is a very well-known modern dance choreographer and not known for his niceness, said at intermission, you are the top of the town, baby. Which to Ratmansky was, it was very surprising to this very polite Russian, Ukrainian, but at the time thought of as Russian man, very formal. So I came out of that performance thinking, I've never seen a ballet like this. And what do I mean by that? It was a full evening ballet that was both comic and warm, and where the performances felt incredibly fresh. And it used the Russian technique, but it also got rid of all of the cliches of Russian ballet. The dancers seemed natural, they seemed very personable. You felt like you knew them after. And it was also very sophisticated. And so it was this combination of humor and sophistication and warmth and bravura dancing that at the same time didn't feel stilted or generic in any way. And so from that moment I sort of thought, who is this person? And the very next year he made a ballet for New York City Ballet, and people were wondering, what is this going to be like? And it was so fascinating because he made a ballet that was abstract, because he thought New York is used to abstract ballet, so I'm going to make an abstract ballet. And at the same time, it's, again, felt, you had the sense of an artist with an enormous imagination, because he drew on folk themes, and on dreams, and on the Russian Orthodox calendar, and again, it was so rich, and at the same time, so new. So from that moment, I really thought, I need to follow this artist very closely.
And how long was it from that time until the seed of, oh, I would like to write a book about this person? And then how do you actually approach that person about doing that?
It took a while. I mean, I never set out to write a book. That wasn't my intention. What I set out to do was to learn as much as possible about him and to interview him every opportunity I had. You know, if there was an article that was going to be written about a piece of his, I would volunteer for it, and I would go see all his works. And I think it was 2016, he made a ballet called Serenade After Plato's Symposium, set to Bernstein. And it was just such, I felt like he had reached a new peak in his sophistication. It's a ballet that is inspired by Plato's Symposium, and so the Symposium is a series of monologues about love. And in his dance, somehow he managed to convey the sense of speaking through the body. And not just speaking, but argumenting a case, having a conversation, mulling over a thought. And I just thought, I've never seen anything like this. And so after that ballet, I really thought, I'd like to write a book about him someday. You know, I've seen enough of his work. I really think there's something there. And I had interviewed him enough times to know that he was also a very interesting person and kind of an enigmatic person. And I wanted to kind of understand how this person could make The Bright Stream, Russian Seasons, and Serenade After Plato's Symposium, the same person.
So did you just approach him and propose a book, and how was that received?
So that, I actually, when I went home after that performance, we already had a line of communication, I would say. I mean, there's still a formality between us, but by that point I had written enough about him that he knew who I was, and he had a respect for my work. So I actually sent him an email, and I said, first I said how wonderful I thought the ballet was, but I said, I think one day I'd really like to write a book about you. And he answered, he's a night owl as I am. And so he said, like, one line, I would be honored. And I thought, oh my God. Maybe I should write a book about it. It suddenly felt like something real. So then I talked to a few people in the book world, and it seemed there was actually a lot of interest because by the time he made that ballet, he had made so many ballets in New York and for other companies that people were really interested to know more about him, and because he's enigmatic, and because he comes from somewhere else, because he had worked in so many different places. He had worked in Russia, he had worked in Denmark, he had worked in Canada, he had worked in Ukraine, and nobody knew the whole story. Everybody knew one little piece of the story, and especially the American dancers that he worked with knew only the American period. By the time he came here, he was a fully formed artist, so nobody knew how he got to become that artist. And so there was a real interest. So from there, it was kind of, everything sped up very quickly, and by the end of 2017, I had a contract and it was going to happen. and he had agreed to do it in reality, which, I actually asked him out for lunch and explained how time-consuming this was going to be and how tired he was going to be of me. And I asked him, is that okay with you? Because this is someone who works, 90% of the time, that's all he does. He's in a ballet studio. So he had to be able to tolerate my presence. And one thing I discovered about him is that, he took a beat to think about it, and then he said, okay. He's a man of few words. So he said, okay. And I knew at that moment that meant okay. And in fact, that's what the process was like. When he says okay, that means okay. So I spent countless hours watching him in rehearsal. I've spent countless hours, finding those moments when he wasn't in a ballet studio to ask him a million questions. And, I went to Ukraine and I interviewed every single person that I could find who knew him. So he was very hands off, and the first thing he said was, who would want to read this book? And from there it meant that he was quite hands off about the whole thing, which is for a biographer really, really crucial, because you don't want someone who's going to try to manipulate the story and try to get the story that the myth. I really wanted to tell the story that I found.
I think I was aware pretty early on when I was reading it that he's a man of few words. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about how, because you weren't going to get it directly from him necessarily, what did you do to try to gather all that information? I know you did some really extensive traveling and interviewing and with a translator and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah. I saw it from the beginning as a kind of mosaic of voices that would form a portrait of this artist. It was a portrait of the artist. The thing that was interesting about the interviews with him was that the process was gradual, but it was almost like a gradual relaxation in him, from where he was formal and answering questions to where I could sense that the process actually interested him, because he hadn't had the opportunity to talk about his art in depth that way with anyone it's not that common a thing. So at the beginning he was reticent, but eventually the conversations became longer and longer, and that's what I remember the most, is these, going, a lot of the interviews were done in this lounge in his building, and, seeing the sun go down, and, we were still talking, and it was dinner time and we're still talking. And I would always ask him, is this too much? Do you have something to do? And he would say, no, it's fine. So I did manage to get him to talk a lot, and he's actually very honest and very, in a way, very open if he trusts you. But then I supplemented that with interviewing his parents in Kyiv. I went to Kyiv. I spent an incredible week there. Hours each day sitting at the dinner table with his parents and hearing about his childhood. We visited the building where he grew up, which was this very Soviet, kind of rundown, ugly building on the outskirts of Kyiv. And I remember looking at his mother, and she looked a little embarrassed, and thinking, this is where he came from. This is where he played with his friends, and she would call out the window and say, it's time for dinner, and he would still want to be, making up stories with his friends. Everything just became so vivid and visual by being there. It's such a different experience than reading about things in a book. I could feel the Soviet period by being there. I went to the Chernobyl Museum in Kyiv, and I saw pictures of the red forests after the Chernobyl disaster. And I understood things about one of his ballets that I had never understood before, which is he took the Firebird and he set it in this kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland. And he had never told me that had anything to do with Chernobyl, but it was obvious that he didn't need to tell me. I knew. So then when I spoke to his designer and I asked him, did you ever talk about Chernobyl when you were making the designs for this ballet? And he said, oh yes, we talked about the Red Forest. You know, so you find out things in a kind of circuitous way. And then, you know, spending time at the Bolshoi and seeing the magnitude of that place. And it's like this factory. And one day I got lost in the corridors. There are like 3 different buildings, and when you take the elevator, the 3rd floor in one building is the 5th floor in another building, and you never have any idea where you are. And I got lost. And I spent hours trying to figure out how to get out. And every time I saw a sign that said Vychod, which means exit, I would go and there would be a locked door. And I thought, oh my God, he was the director of this place where you don't know what's going on in half of the building or in 90% of the building. And I remember what he said, that there were a third of the company he never met in his time as director. He was director there for 5 years. A third of the company, he never met them because there are 230 dancers, and you know, some were on vacation and some were having babies and some just never came to work. So when you go there, you realize all sorts of things, you know, and going to the Bolshoi school and seeing this building that's a full block. And it's a square and around a courtyard, and with the studios and the school and the dormitory, and you realize these kids come in one end, and then 8 years later they come out and they're dancers. They don't need anything outside of that world. So that's where he was for 8 years, and that formed his base. So things like that were all little discoveries.
I think the book is very, it's wonderful for someone who's really interested in dance and choreography, because you have such a wonderful eye for what you see and for describing it. I got about halfway in and I still was feeling like, who is this guy? And then I realized he is his work. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. I mean, it really seems like he is singularly focused, even though the body of his work is so broad.
That's such an interesting observation, and I absolutely agree. He is his work. He spends 90% of his energy, thought, time thinking about his work, about his ballets. The one he's working on, the next one he's going to make, one that maybe he'll make in a few years, listening to music for possible other ballets. When he's making a ballet, he is completely, that's all he does. He works in the studio all day long, and then he comes home and eats something, and then Tatiana, his wife, goes to sleep, and then he continues working. And so his ballets absolutely express everything that he's read, everything that he's seen, everything, his sense of humor, his aesthetics. You know, he loves manga, so a lot of his ballets have, not a lot, but there's a sense of playfulness and even grotesquerie sometimes, and surreality. His favorite book is Alice in Wonderland. So there's an Alice in Wonderland feeling to some of his work. And because he's an extremely shy man, really, that this is how he expresses who he is and his emotions. And I think I felt that in particular, he and his wife Tatiana have this incredible bond, and they're like this little island together. They don't need anyone else.
And she's really instrumental in his work.
And she's very instrumental, and she's his first critic, and he bounces ideas off of her. But he absolutely adores her. And I saw this opera that he made for the Paris Opera Ballet called Psyché, set to music by Ravel. And it's full of, it's this ballet that just glows with love. And that's the subject. So, it's Cupid. But at the end of the ballet, there's this moment where Psyché sits down and she has a ball under her dress until she's pregnant, and then Cupid puts his hand on her belly. And I just had shivers when I saw it, because I thought this whole ballet is about Tatiana and their son. You know, it's about the myth of Psyche, but it's also about Tatiana and their son. So, yes, he expresses himself through ballet.
And his work is so diverse, as you said. Is there, can you watch a Ratmansky ballet and go, oh yeah, that's definitely Ratmansky? And what is it about his work that would, tell you that?
I feel I can, because I've watched a lot, but I do think there's a kind of signature quality to his work. There's several different things that are very common to a lot of his work. One is complexity. He tends to like to pack the stage with many, many areas of activity, so you're forced to really look at lots of things at once. And I think sometimes that's a little, it's surprising to the audience, and sometimes it takes seeing one of his ballets twice to catch what's happening over there and over there. He really loves to fill the eye. Another aspect of his work is that he doesn't like generic movement. He likes movement with a lot of nuance. So you see choreography where things are never straight on, they have more facets, they have more curves, the musicality is never even, there's fast and then slow and then really strong and then delicate. So there's a lot of contrast and texture in the movement. And they're really hard. A lot of dancers talk about how difficult they are to dance. So they push the technique, they push the art of ballet forward. And I see a connection between his modern work and his more classical ballets too, because they have this same quality of nuance and curves and facets. And I also think there's a particular warmth in his work that kind of runs through all of it. There's a humanity and an embrace of ambiguity. It doesn't have to be 100% funny, it doesn't have to be 100% sad. There's a kind of mixture and chiaroscuro of both things.
I can't remember, I know we talked about this before, I can't remember exactly what the timing was, but I believe that you had finished at least the majority of the book when Russia invaded Ukraine. And obviously that was a very complex event for him, having grown up in Kyiv when it was part of Russia, and for the first part of his career at least, having a real allegiance to Soviet music and some of the old Soviet ballets and so forth. Since the book was largely written at that point, did you kind of go, oh dear, what do I do about this now?
I didn't go, oh dear, because I had already intuited earlier that the theme of his identity was something it was sort of an identity in the process of becoming. He was very unclear about his identity through most of the process, and he would talk about it as, well, I'm a Soviet man, well, I'm a post-Soviet man, well, I don't really have a home, well, my home is ballet. So there was a lot of, there was ambivalence and ambiguity in his own mind about it. And I had already noticed that in his family there was some tension about Ukrainian-ness and Russian-ness. So he grew up in Kyiv, which is the capital of Ukraine. His mother is Russian and his father is Ukrainian Jewish. And he began to become curious about his Jewish ancestry early on, and he made a ballet called Leah, which is based on the Dybbuk. So that was already something of course, his Jewish identity had been repressed during the Soviet Union, and so it was something his father didn't talk about, even though he had lost many family members during the Second World War. But his Ukrainian identity only began to surface when he came to the United States. And his very first ballet for American Ballet Theater was called On the Dnieper, now called On the Dnipro, which is about a soldier after the First World War coming back to his village in Ukraine. And so it was only after he came to the US that he started to making ballets that were dealing with Ukrainian ideas, stories. And when the war happened, when the war started, he was actually in Moscow. He was making a ballet for the Bolshoi Ballet. And his wife had actually begged him not to go. And he said, well, I have a contract, I have to do it. He's like that. He's sort of, I have to make this ballet. And on the night before the Russians invaded, his a beloved friend came and said, they're not going to invade, don't worry. And then 6 hours later, they invaded. And immediately he left the country. And things suddenly became very, very clear to him. I mean, after the horrible fog of what's happening, and his parents live in Kyiv, and his sister lives in Kyiv, and Tatiana's family is in Ukraine, but suddenly he realized it was very clear. The country that was wrong was Russia, and the country that was being attacked was his country. And he didn't want to go back to Russia, and that was it. Russia was over for him. And he asked the Bolshoi and the Mariinsky not to perform his ballets anymore. And they didn't comply. They performed and then they just removed his name from them. So basically what changed was, obviously I had to address this issue. But I just realized that this subtext that I had always known was part of the story, it just became enhanced. And then I realized I had to call the book The Boy from Kyiv. Because in fact, when he was at the Bolshoi school, they called him the boy from Kyiv, which was a way of saying, you're not from here. And when you finish school here, you're going to have to go back there. And that's what happened when he finished school. They said, well, bye-bye, go back to Kyiv, because that's where you're from. So suddenly this thing that had seemed almost innocent and like a term of endearment really became clear that it was very much part of his story.
Fantastic. I know we're limited in time here, but maybe you could talk a little bit about, he has just recently become the the artist in residence at New York City Ballet. Can you talk about how he is looking forward to that, and has he shared anything about what his plans are?
So he's choreographer in residence at New York City Ballet. So when he came to New York, when he was going to leave the Bolshoi, he announced he was leaving the Bolshoi. And immediately there were rumors that he was going to join New York City Ballet. And everyone was super eager. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times that said, he's coming next Tuesday to talk to Peter Martins, the director of City Ballet. And then Tuesday came, and then there was no announcement in the Times, no announcement. And then a week later, there was an announcement that said, he's not coming to the New York City Ballet. He's going to ABT. No, the ABT came later. He's not coming to City Ballet. And everyone thought, what happened? So one of the things I did for this book is I found out what happened. Because everybody wanted to know. And basically, it was a faux pas on his part he was called by the New York Times and asked, are you going to have a meeting with New York City Ballet? And being a very frank person, he said, yes. And it's basically done, and all I have to do is sign the contract. And Peter Martins was furious, and it didn't happen. So instead he joined ABT. He had 13 incredible years at ABT, made so many amazing ballets there, got to make reconstructions of 19th century works based on notations. I mean, it was a really great tenure there. But I think he always wished that had worked. That was the natural place for him, because he has an enormous admiration for George Balanchine. When he was a student at the Bolshoi school, nobody spoke of Balanchine. He wasn't spoken of at the school. And it wasn't until he graduated that his teacher gave him, samizdat, secretly, a video of Peter Martins and Suzanne Farrell dancing Apollo. and he instantly knew this is what he wanted to dance. And he thought, well, I'll never be able to because I live in Russia or in Kyiv. As soon as the Soviet Union came to an end, he left and he went to Canada and he danced Balanchine. So for him, Balanchine was the guiding star. His ballets are very different from Balanchine's, but still there's this deep admiration. And so for him, and when he was dancing in Canada, he auditioned twice for New York City Ballet, and they didn't give him the time of day because they don't take dancers, Russian dancers, out of nowhere. So there was this kind of deep-seated desire to be connected to that company. And so there is a kind of poetic kind of closure to the fact that after 13 wonderful years at ABT, he is now at City Ballet, and he's kind of ready for it now. He's made all these ballets, and now he can sort of do whatever he wants. And that's what I think he's going to do at City Ballet. I think he's going to experiment, because the ballets he makes for City Ballet are usually a little freer, a little bit more experimental. And what's to be seen is how this great sadness and great tragedy that has come out of seeing his country destroyed, to some extent by Russian forces, how that is going to influence his work. So two great forces are coming together. It's a completely new chapter.
And does that mean there will be another book?
Somebody else asked me that. We'll both be very old, because he's not that much older than me, so I need to wait many years for that to happen. So I don't know. I think he's maybe sick of me now.
You might have to take a little break. Well, we wanted to leave some time for questions, so if you are in the audience and you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll get a mic to you, maybe, or come up and use the mic. I don't know how far this thing stretches.
I think we can hear you.
What was his reaction to the finished book?
Oh, yes. So we had a deal, which was, so I was given advice by Jonah Coachella, who was the dance critic of the New Yorker for many years, and who I really respect and admire. And when I was going to write the book, I had lunch with her and we talked about it. And she said, one thing you have to do is don't give him approval of the book. Tell him he doesn't have approval of the book. So, okay, good advice. So I told him when I was going to start the book, so this is my book, my thoughts. I'm the author. So you don't have control of the results of this book. Is that okay? Okay. But what I will do is that at the end of the process, I'll let you read it. I'll give it to you before I send it to the editor, and you can have it for 2 weeks. And then if you have any issues with it, we can talk about them. At least I'll know what they are. And so I did that, and a week later, I was doing a piece on him for the Times, and so I happened to cross paths with him, and he said, well, I've read the book. So my stomach kind of, and he said, I've never, it's strange to have all your life before you like this, but I like it. And so that was it. And then he did, but he did me the honor and the favor of doing a lot of fact checking, which was so useful, because you write a book about someone, 400 pages, you get dates wrong, the wrong theater or whatever. So he's a very precise person. So we went through, no, this happened before that, and so that was very, very helpful. But yes, he liked it. And then he just recently said, we didn't have a lot of conversations about this, but now that the book is out, he did recently say in a public forum how kind of interesting and amazing it is to have your whole career laid before you, and to kind of recognize the desires that you had as a child and see them realized and have it all kind of documented. So.
Anybody else?
How old was he when he stopped dancing himself?
So he stopped at 34, he stopped quite young because he was dancing at the Royal Danish Ballet at the time. And while he was dancing at the Royal Danish Ballet, he was making a lot of ballets. His colleagues in Denmark didn't know, really, but he was making ballets for the Mariinsky and for companies all around the world. And so he couldn't really keep in shape to the degree that he wanted to. And then he got the offer from the Bolshoi. And he realized, you can't direct the Bolshoi and also continue to dance. It's just they're two mutually exclusive activities. And you don't say no to the Bolshoi. So, even though his wife didn't want him to go, but you don't say no to the Bolshoi. It's an opportunity that you cannot turn your back on. And so he made the choice. He was 34.
Marina, talk about the epilogue that you wrote about the war that he contributed to.
She asked about the epilogue, which I wrote after the invasion, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That was one thing that did change. So there was the title, and then I also wrote an epilogue. So for the first few months after the invasion, he really couldn't talk about it. He was in total shock. He couldn't work, for the first time ever. He was just completely paralyzed. And then that summer, he went to Holland, to the Netherlands, to work with a company that had been formed of Ukrainian dancers in exile, called the United Ukrainian Ballet. And I went to The Hague to report on that company for the Times. And after that, we sat down and we had a conversation about that, about working with Ukrainian dancers, about the war, about his feelings about Russia. I mean, it was the first of a few conversations about this. And I realized that the ending had to change. And I realized in a way that this was the new Ratmansky. In fact, later I did an interview with him in which he said, this is the me of now. And the epilogue is essentially that, it's the him of now. This is an artist who has always worked in light and in joy, who he kind of contradicts that idea that artists have to be these suffering, tortured souls. He's a happy person. He had a happy childhood. He loves his parents. He loves his wife. He's funny. He loves comedy. He's a humanist. And suddenly he encountered something that was so dark and was so paralyzing that it just instantly changed him. And so the epilogue is it's trying to account for the beginning of that transformation. I mean, he's going to change more, and he's just starting. I mean, just discovering that he's Ukrainian was already kind of a huge thing for him. And also, in a way, becoming a true New Yorker, like so many people who come from other places where there is conflict, and to find that your roots are in this city where there are people from everywhere, and in a way, it's the perfect place to comment on what's happening in your other world. So it really changed, for me, the epilogue changed the meaning of the entire book, actually.
Did it have another title before The Boy from Kyiv?
Yeah, it had this very kind of, I thought I need to have a serious title. This is my first book, this has to be very dignified. And I can't remember exactly what it was. It was totally forgettable. So forgettable that I've forgotten it, yeah. And I tried a few other types of, some people thought boy was kind of too cutesy or something, but that's what they called him at school. It kind of imposed itself. That had to be the title. And he loves it, by the way. He loves the title, yeah. He didn't tell me until later, but he loves the title.
All right, we might have time for one more quick one. Yes.
Some of us here know that in addition to Marina being an author, she's also a dancer. So I'm wondering, did you ask for any corrections?
Did I ask Who? Alexei for corrections? Well, I mean, I did ask him. That's when the fact checking came
No,
in.
not that type of correction. Ballet
Oh, ballet corrections. No, I didn't get any ballet things wrong. I don't think. He didn't say so.
You're missing my point.
She meant corrections, I think,
Basically,
to
you're
your
ballet
dancing.
Oh my gosh, I am not a dancer. Can I just put that out there? But we are in class together. I take ballet with several members of the audience at Sarasota Ballet School. There's a branch in the Rosemary District. This is one of my teachers. That's one of my teachers. Macarena is, well, she doesn't teach
There's
us.
another teacher.
There's Alberto is another one of our teachers. So, yeah, no, I do it for exercise and for meditation, but I am absolutely horrible and have no talent.
Every dancer says that.
But I really mean it.
Who writes the music for him?
He uses music by many different composers. He's used music, he's had music written for him by a also Ukrainian-born composer called Leonid Desyatnikov. But he has used music by Ravel, by Strauss, by Bernstein, by Shostakovich, by Tchaikovsky, by by French composers, he's used a lot of Russian music. He likes Russian music a lot, but he's used a lot of different composers. Yeah.
I think we need to wrap up so people can have time to have their books signed. I would like to ask one question of a member of the audience. Ian Webb of the Sarasota Ballet, director, is in the back row. And I'd just like to know when we'll be seeing a Ratmansky ballet performed by the Sarasota Ballet.
Well, obviously, I first met him through Joseph Bope when we went to the ABT gala, and there's two pieces of world premiere by him, and Joe would say, well, come backstage, I've got to do something. Now, I knew what he was doing, and there was then suddenly Josephine came back with Alexei, so that's the first time I met him. And then we were performing at the Joyce Theatre. We were doing an all-national program, and I invited him to come and see the dancers in the hope that we could get them. But also with this thing of that he's so into all the history and everything that I gave him a small present. I gave him an autograph of Sir Fred. And during the ballet, he was more looking at the autograph. So I kind of like didn't quite work out that way. I keep dropping hints to try and get.
And Joe, you commissioned the Aida ballet, right, from him? Was that your doing for the Metropolitan Opera?
Well, planned, but then I left prior to it happening.
Yeah.
Well, that'll give us something to look forward to, as well as Marina's next book. Please help me in thanking Marina.
Thank you all.